Greetings, everyone. Glad to have you with us. This is Content Evolution New World. I'm Kevin Clark here on the East Coast, and my co-host Mike McGuire is on the West Coast. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Kevin. Hey, everybody. How is everybody doing today?
Doing great. In the news, and for someone who has a better pronunciation, Anwitsiki, tell me what the pronunciation is of Anwitsiki.
Wojcicki.
So the J is pronounceable.
It's Wojcicki.
Okay, thank you. So Ann Wojcicki, who is the head and founder of 23andMe, had her board resign. So our topic today is that's the background news to the larger topic of, governance. All right. And here is a company. And by the way, there are many companies that have gone from public to private to public to private. There are, many reasons to do that, but we're going to, use this piece of news as a catalyst for having that conversation. Mike, I found it interesting. We've had, in the time that we've had the Content Evolution collab going, we basically had a similar big resignation at OpenAI, all right, and we'll say a reformation of how that company was choosing to operate. By the way, we need to get that company renamed because there isn't much open about it anymore. But okay, but with that said, I'm going to put my branding hat down. What do you take about this 23andMe and similar news? What are you taking away from it?
Well, I think, as we've talked, as you mentioned, many companies have gone private. I think the one I remember from in my career was Dell. And sure. That was a, multi-year process. Mm-hmm. It's somewhat, I think, distracting, I guess, disturbing that it's A, the entire board, B, in at once. And the message was clear that, they've been waiting for months for the so-called, actionable plan to go private. And I think, this is, I wonder, I don't know this about 23andMe, but is this another case where we've seen Google over the years kind of struggle and even Meta kind of struggle and then because they've taken a step, right, of getting rid of, quote, manager types, business types, with a focus clearly on engineering, right, where all the resources are focused on that.
Mm-hmm. But Mike, just to be clear, the Dell scenario was quite different than this particular.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't want to. Thank you for. I don't want to make those the same. Appear as the same situation.
They're very different, and I know a lot about that because I was involved. But you remember he was under threat by corporate raiders, who were trying to put their lead people on the board. Well, he fought that down, but in the process, he said, "I'm never going to deal with that again."
Right.
And that was a motivation where he started down that particular process. And I have some personal stories about that I won't talk about, but because I had some heart-to-hearts with Michael on it. But my point is that particular one was driven by a completely different scenario where in this case with Ann, those 5 board members were in total disagreement with her strategy going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And they would say, and I'm glad you clarified that, Tim. I didn't want to make those equivalent. I just meant Dell as an example of a company that went public to private. And I think, this is where, as you point out, if a board, is unified against this plan or the lack thereof of going private, there is some, reason to look in the mirror, I guess. But if you're Ann, but I just find it interesting is that if that was a case where, the business was interesting and somewhat unique, but what happens when an executive runs into that situation and simply finds no way to work with a board? And I guess, Tim, I just haven't seen, a case where the board, blindsided the CEO, right? There was news. I mean, Dell's issues when Michael.
Except that the board blindsided Sam Altman when they decided to kick him out. So, and there are other cases where the board blindsided CEOs. Even Intel had that happen at one time. But my point that there are scenarios where that does happen. It's just that this particular one, and Kevin, you need to drill down a little bit deeper onto why the board disagreed.
Yeah, well,
Because
we clearly want to get to that. What is your perspective? I know what's been reported in the news, and I know what's been speculated in terms of, data leaving the company, right, where there was kind of a promise to customers that, your data is secure here and it's being sold to pharma companies as a revenue stream. So there was some, notional idea of, breach of promise here, right, in terms of what the company said it would do and what it was actually doing. But what's your perspective?
well, there's a
Tim, you
couple
start.
of things. I'll just say that first of all, the company itself has been forced to evolve dramatically from its original vision.
Mhm.
I was one of the first to actually get my DNA and all that stuff from them. They introduced this at Wall Street Journal conference, and I can't remember the year. And we were able to get the actual test at that time was like $300 or something.
Mhm.
And as a part of that Wall Street Journal conference, I think we got it for like $99. And I said, yeah, what the heck? So I did that, and over the years, they've given me a lot of good data on it. The problem is that business model to the consumer didn't work, and they
Right.
were forced to evolve dramatically to find other forms of revenue. And they're at that juncture again where they've kind of hit they kind of hit a wall in the sense of their customers, and that's why she branched out to the pharmaceuticals. But as I understand it, and again, I've only read it peripherally, but that's part of what the board was concerned about, because there were ethics questions and other stuff that kind of floated.
Mhm.
And in the end, they decided that they could not support her vision of new revenue.
Mhm.
And that's what, it kind of what do you call it?
Spiraled.
Spiraled, into that particular direction.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I think
And
that in any business that had an original set of, terms and conditions that wanted to move to a different, set of Ts and Cs would basically, you could from, if you wanted to pursue it from an ethical point of view, you would go back and ask permission from the people and say, would you like your information to advance, medical science, pharmaceutical research, and so on and so forth. If you do, you can opt in, right? And, be part of that. And if you don't, all right, we'll continue to protect your data, or, we're changing our business model and we're going to delete your data. All right. Whatever, would be an appropriate opt-in mechanism from that. And, maybe that wasn't present as part of the strategy that was being presented. I mean, there's a little bit of, there's always an issue here. And I sit on, some boards myself. I'm the chairman of one company, and between operational decisions, all right, that are strategic, and governance decisions that are strategic. And this seems to be one of those tweeners, right? And that creates tension between the operation of the company and and governance, and the difference between a board decision and a shareholder decision, right? Because those are two classes of meetings and two different bodies of decision making. All right, I saw something in a text from Kyle. You wanted to say something about what happened with the Sam Altman world, and he just dropped. No, there he is. He just changed position. Kyle, have some thoughts?
No, well, I had a question I have a question for the room, basically, on, I mean, if the board didn't agree with where she was going, ousting the CEO seems like a more traditional path, or one or two board members quitting seems like something I've heard before. The entire board going feels like something more dramatic happened.
Yeah, I agree, Kyle. I think that, when that was what struck us, or me anyhow, was entirely, and board disagreements, as Tim has pointed out, are not unusual. Boards, not agreeing with the CEO or the CEO's concept of direction, but it certainly is, at least, it seemed A, very quick, B, when the entire board of directors walks out. But I think the replacement, theory you describe, right, we've often seen in play, right, was, well, it's kind of tough when she owns 49% of everything.
I think that's the entire issue, is that she had so many shares that she was effectively the controlling party for a lot of this stuff. So the board, could vote to oust her, and she could, in a shareholder meeting, retain her position.
Yeah. The thing I'll say on the OpenAI stuff, there's Mira Murati, who's the CTO, left yesterday, as did two other
right.
Senior directors. You've got Greg Brockman that's on leave. You got Ilya left. Andre.
We're back to OpenAI now.
Yeah, sorry, I shifted back to OpenAI. This is what I want to say.
I just want to provide context for people who are listening. Go ahead.
Sorry. So all that happened, and it's on Twitter. I see a lot of commentary about what's going on at OpenAI, and for me, yes, there could be some things happening, but also you've got a company that's transitioning from a research lab to a consumer technology company, and they're about to unwind the nonprofit control of the for-profit company. They're about to spin that out as a truly for-profit company. Altman's going to get 7% of the shares, apparently. That's going to be a very different company that requires very different leadership. I would argue that their current leadership is not doing very well at the consumer product. Right? They announced the GPT store and then they ignore it for a year. They say they're going to roll out voice and then it's 6 months delayed. There've been lots and lots and lots of missteps with behaving like a consumer company, and it makes sense because they're a research lab that has been effectively forced to transition. So I don't see all of these departures as dramatic as a lot of people are talking about. I see it as, it makes sense to me that there's going to be a massive purge. They've probably hit some level of AGI that they're going to be able to declare. They're going to flip this to a for-profit company, and they're going to need an entirely new, leadership layer anyway. So my thought is just, it doesn't seem as dramatic to me as a lot of people are making it out to be.
Okay. So for the sake of just being provocative. So what inoculates Sam Altman from that leadership purge? Are you saying, oh, well, he wasn't doing, all that well in terms of, shifting people and blah,
Kevin,
blah, blah.
But Kevin,
I'm being
no. I just want to state that the issue, there's a lot of issues that are going on about that. But the problem was he still was the guiding visionary for the company.
True.
And by taking him out of that position, he clearly, they were the guys on the board, and some of them were not qualified actually to be on that board. They were not the right type of people who could drive the company forward.
Exactly.
There was a group of people on the other side that said, you as a board cannot provide that visionary role. You got to put Sam back in. And that's what caused the issue to kind of reverse itself. And of course, then it began to realize that some of the board people were not even, some of them were, they were outsiders who didn't even really understand what was going on. And I just want to clarify that because there was a flip. And then to make it worse, Elon Musk got involved.
Yeah.
Right.
Then he started yelling at him because he says, when I put my money in, it was going to be a
open source research development.
Yeah, because the board looked like a university or a not-for-profit board, which was original, as opposed to a commercial enterprise kind of board, right, Tim?
As did a lot of the executives.
I know. Yeah, exactly. So
Sam, the point about Sam is, this is a guy that ran Y Combinator, right?
Yeah.
He's he's an entrepreneur, right? So I think Sam is the one who's been pushing this toward, right? Apparently Sam's been meeting, multiple times a week with people in Washington. The last thing I heard is he's been pushing for the US to create five gigawatt nuclear plants or energy generating plants to be able to keep up with the energy demands that are about to come, that if we don't build that. So he's playing a long game and a big game. So
and
for me-
Microsoft just got involved in restarting 3 Mile Island.
exactly.
Right? Because they said, well, we're going to have a lot of data centers and we'd like to not, impact you so that you have brownouts or blackouts, right, in your houses, right, while we're running our data centers. So, we would like to help you have
Help
more
us.
energy, US. Okay. Well, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably something that is, I would also point out that, the inefficiency of the grid, that some of these organizations that need those things are going to come to the conclusion that they need to build their own power plant right next to their generation, consumption. And since they don't know anything about running, power, they're going to come up with joint ventures, right, to figure out how to handle that. And
Kevin,
then that's going to be private power. Go ahead, Tim.
We're going to say there is a comparison, or at least another a past example that kind of fits into this discussion. As you know, Steve Jobs was ousted as CEO.
Good example.
And during the period that Steve was gone, Apple almost fell apart.
Yep.
Now, to be fair,
awful. It was awful.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from, watching it as a person who follows industrial design, what the guy from, I'm not going to mention names, but the guy who came in from Pepsi did, right, it's kind of like, yuck.
Okay,
well, no, but
let
no.
him finish his point.
Yeah, but listen, Scully actually saved it in the context of at least continuing a visionary approach, because once he introduced the desktop publishing thing, Apple actually got back on track.
Right.
And Scully actually introduced multimedia computing as well. He took a minor visionary role. But when he left and Spindler came on, that's when things went bananas, because Spindler decided he was going to be a PC company.
Yep.
And he cut the Motorola deal, a bunch of other stuff. My only point was that I think there's a tale here that says, if they do kick the visionary out, what happens to the company? And Apple's a good example, because it was only when Steve came back, who was again in the role of the visionary,
right,
he drove Apple to the way it is right now. And I think that part of the thing with Altman is kind of indicative of that in the end, that visionary is driving the company. And I agree with Kyle that he's got them all over the map, but I would be the last one to suggest that Altman not be driving the vision.
No, I agree.
right. But you put more guardrails or partners around him, right, Tim?
Yeah.
Let him be the visionary that meets with and drives that. But there has to be, somebody paying attention to the legal, business ramifications of that, what's underpinning the vision.
Yeah. And that's why right now
day,
you got to watch really closely on who becomes the new CTO, right? And guys like that, they're going to need to drive that forward. And again, what Steve did is he brings in somebody like Tim Cook, and he brings in,
Tony Fadell or any of those guys. Right?
And that's where it, and again, that's to me the bigger thing to watch about OpenAI on this transition is who does Altman bring in to replace these guys to help him with this vision? Because just like Jobs did, Jobs sat up at the top, but he basically orchestrated the vision. And Altman right now is trying to do everything.
Well,
right.
Altman, the fun parallel there is apparently working with Johnny Ives on a hardware product. So that's also happening. So there is an actual connection back to the Apple story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm taking away from this, going back to the board, is what are you governing? What is the charter,
Mhm.
right? And in the cases that we're talking about, in some of these cases, the charter changed, right? And therefore, do you need a different cast of characters? Yes, you do, right? If you're gonna change the charter.
Well, Ben's got a couple comments in there too, right? Is that, Ben, could you illuminate more on that notion of what you were saying there in chat?
Well, I put in several points. First of all, the issue of the values change, transition to public, put at risk the historic values that that stimulated the growth, and there's a different social contract that that's involved, and we can talk about the population of the individual board members, and certainly I've been on public and private boards and head of governance and so forth on a number. But you do find different transition points and pressure points that change the horizon and visualization, and would have been better served by never going public. At the time, she pretty much probably felt she needed to for financial pressures going. But in today's world, you could probably persist as a private company and still have enriched and kept her value system that she did at the founding.
No, and I think, Ben, as you talk about that, is as you were speaking about that, the question became, was there never any move to, or do you expect to see, did we see in the past, and this isn't about getting into original reporting or anything, but there's always a need in that complex situation to have somebody with a lot of experience on the business side, right? To run a public company, not to do the genetic engineering and the selecting tools, but rather, making payroll and taking care of shareholders. That, do you sense that kind of this? It reminds me similar to, remember that purge that happened at Google 20 years ago, right? Where they got rid of a lot of managers and said, let's, remove layers of that in the company to get engineering much closer to the top and let engineers run it. Do you sense, I'm going to ask the room too, what would be those first 2 or 3 things you do as an executive coming in to help Ann move this forward?
Well, I could certainly say from a governance standpoint, they did not prepare for a post-public operating practice. I recall I did a lot of work, the CEO of UPS, for example. I used to do a lot of work with. I went into his office one day near Christmas time. I said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And he said, "Annual guidance." Was what he would want for Christmas, because the pressures of quarterly guidance were extreme, and Anne needed a body around her, a body of people, not just one, and that may have been shifting the board. Somebody pressed for liquidation and valuation, liquidating their positions and moved to public. I think they did it fairly premature. At the time, it might have made sense. Today, I don't think you have to, and you can grow exponentially without being public. Somebody wanted their cash and walk away.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing that is inhibiting growth at Mars or SC Johnson or some other, privately held, companies. They seem to be, faring fine in the world. And as, Tim has the experience of, how Dell's doing, today. Suzanne, you had some thoughts in chat. Join us.
Yes, going back to the 23andMe context, there was an interview on 60 Minutes. I think it was within this past month that I viewed, and it was interesting because she was questioned about her affiliation with China and that they process our DNA data. And it just brings up so many flags for digital privacy. It's concerning. And I wonder if maybe this move maybe because you're right, somebody wanted their money, or it feels to me that something is going on with the governments and the regulations for the privacy of that data. Maybe they, by going public, maybe it'll expose more processes. I'm not sure, but I'd like you guys to see it. It's 60 minutes. It's really, really good. And it brings up these questions, these concerns.
Okay. So that's another, potential trigger. You get resignation sometimes when people feel like, there's about to trigger directors and owners insurance liability, right? That
Correct.
maybe I would
Absolutely. You
like
hit-
to,
Yes.
not be part of, this, the era, that they think they're about to be part of. So we'll see.
Good point. Good point.
Wait,
Mark,
maybe the board went to a bunch of P. Diddy parties. Hang
Could
on a
be.
second.
Mark, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I'm just going to reiterate what I said the last time. And this is the big lesson that I learned from going to business school and getting involved in business, that they call it a for-profit company for a reason. It's for profit. That's really the underlying thing that it's for. We can all put up ethics and values and lots of things in our imaginations, but when it comes to the bottom, it's really people are going to who run these companies are going to do, because it's their job to do, things that bring profit into the company. And if we want to have other things, we can have not-for-profits or other kinds of things. But once you make it a profit company, you got to go for the profits.
Well,
And that's fine, but there are legal and illegal ways to accomplish that,
Right.
Mark. And so the fact is that, we may be, detecting that there's something that the board said, this isn't a legal means of pursuing that end.
Yeah.
and
You know-
it wasn't working, right? They
Well-
hadn't been profitable at all. And I think this becomes, if there's a core set of values, some real valuable IP in there, that becomes a challenge, right? When the founder, the CEO who has been running the company hasn't been generating profit, or at least, to paraphrase, the concept of profits in the future. Then the challenge is, well, now what do you do when that individual has locked up the stock? And there might be something there in the IP, but nobody, the board, outsiders can get through, right, to make some sort of change. Yep. And that, I think, is where I agree with. Sure, Mark, that's the historical driver of any business is for profit. But I think, as Ben points out, there's other forms. And there can be ways to be both profitable and to be, successful in business, and do it in a somewhat and do it in an ethical manner. I would say Patagonia is a great example of that. Not as complex as genetic mapping.
But a rare example. And
well, I
there's a
might
whole lot we don't
recommend
know about.
that there's an old, here in this library behind me is a book by Pfeffer and Solancic. It's quite old. It's called The External Control of Organizations. All right. And what they're arguing for, and I subscribe to this, is that if maximization of freedom to operate is one of the things that you would like to pursue as an organization, then behavior is what usually causes a regulatory or legislative response inside of any society. So if you would prefer to not be regulated or to not be inhibited, all right, and to have maximum freedom to operate, then you'd have to be behaving in a way in advance inside your industry, collectively, to be able to avoid being externally controlled. And that's I think that's a something that we see over and over again. And, some industries do better at this than others. The ones that have the most regulatory controls, you can go back into history and you can see that they also had the most number of things that were either, deleterious to their workers or to the people that, or it's like the original Sears catalog, weight loss, here we got weight loss, available right here in this capsule. Except inside the capsule are tapeworms. You'll lose weight, for sure, but you're not going to like the outcome, eventually. So with that said, it's a good read, an old read from the 1950s, 60s. So, you might want to take a look at it. Some of that's in the public domain now. So let's go to, back to, governance. Ed, glad to have you with us. What do you see? You're an organization behavioral, psychologist. What do you see in this realm? What is your perspective?
Yeah, and I come at this, less from the point of view of public versus private and the financial implications and legal implications of that. And just as you say, more for the operational, because almost regardless of what the reason being for this, if all these board members resign, it's going to be interpreted negatively and by the people who work there as well as the people outside the company. So that to me feels like there's likely some big operational problems within the company that led to this sort of extreme kind of thing happening. So I would certainly argue for better operations, better communications as part of those operations within the company, that should be looked at closely, not to have a surprise thing like this happen and damage the brand.
Go ahead, Men. Personal liability informs. Say more.
My point was we can talk about the pursuit of profit, but that's the greed side of it. But there's a complementary issue of managing fear. The reason that the entire board left at the same time was a collective response, probably to D&O and personal liability exposure that probably would have confronted whoever stayed.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, you've got to understand it's never just the greed side of it. I need more money, I need more margin, I need more profit. It's I got to protect my rear end, and as well, and individually and collectively. So I don't know whether it was driven by a insufficiency of profit or the liability and exposure on fear, especially with exposure to information sharing that should not have happened or that was not in compliance with the agreements. I mean, I signed on there as well so that information could be used in research, but I never signed for it to be sold. And anonymization is a very tricky word in the healthcare domain. There's very little that can be wholly anonymized without that can be de-anonymized anyway.
I think as far as I know, Ben, in my previous work, about the only thing where you can say the anonymization generally works consistently is in advertising, where they're anonymizing data traffic and usage. And even then, there is the possible to re-identify, right? I mean, that's always a thing those technologies or those processes run up against is it's generally possible to re-identify somebody with very few signals.
And truly anonymizing, you're diminishing most of the value, frankly.
Right. And I think you mentioned that with the some of the capabilities against some of the business challenges, and it wasn't helped when it wasn't just the reselling to pharma, right? It was when you lose the DNA fingerprints of 7 million people through a hack. you know, that's a fairly significant challenge. And this all happened on the board's watch. So I don't think that's, was there a suit that rose out of the data breach or the hack?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. It was last year. That the company confirmed that. And, you know, it's, you know, very small percentage, they said, of the customers, but again, that's 7 million people. And I think that's probably more, Ben leans more to the concerns about liability for the board
the
than
most
anything
recent
else.
data hack notification that I've seen was from Oracle, right? That there was loss of data, you know, the class action suit. So, Ben, we're going to turn the page now that we've been into this conversation for 40 minutes. Ask your question of Tim Beheron again, all right, on the more practical matter of those of us who either have or would like to own an Apple product. You know, ask your question again.
Yeah, I wanted to know, now that we have exposure and public release of the new iPhone 16, and we have talked about configurations associated with the 15 approaching Apple Intelligence, leverage and use, and the shift to the 16, how that is starting to roll out now, and Tim's experience and exposure to that.
Yeah, I think it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago now. I had a session where I dealt a little bit about this. But now that the 16's been out, we've looked at a lot of reviews and we've got to play with it. It's very clear that both the NPU and the CPU is faster in the pros. And the emphasis was, of course, to highlight how those newer speedy processors could enhance Apple Intelligence, which it does. But something we've been able to clarify is that the NPU and the CPU on the iPhone 15 also has enough processing power to operate the Apple Intelligence just about as well. And while I'm not suggesting you should not update to the 16 Pro or Pro Max if you can do so, the 15 has enough power to be able to work with the existing or the new AI features that are in Apple Intelligence. Whereas that's not going to be the case with 14 and under. They just don't have enough of the processing power to take full advantage of it. There'll be some things that can work in the lower end models, but you know, if you have a 12 or 13, you really want to seriously look at updating or upgrading if at all possible. And Ben, I also mentioned that the carrier deals on this right now are absurd. I did a little bit of talk. I had talked with AT&T to try to figure out how mine would work if I put it in, you know, put it in. I have a Max Pro with 1 terabyte. And if I had upgraded to the 16 Pro with 1 terabyte, my monthly would be like $15 over the 2-year period, which for most people is going to be very tolerable. So to your question specifically, the 16 Pro is clearly superior, better processor, higher speed NPU, but the 15 is going to do really well. And one thing that's coming out, by the way, in the reviews, I think, and I mentioned this, that Apple has now this little button that serves more like a click for which you have on a regular camera. A lot of people who have it don't like it. They're just used to the older way, and plus there's a feature with that where you have to you hit once and then you have to hold it down to go to another reading, and it's a little clumsy. When I tested it at the briefing I had, you know, they literally had to come over and help me with it. And to be fair, my fingers are a little bit less agile in my old age, but still, I had trouble getting it to going between one section and the other. But other than that, superior phone.
I have a
Well, Tim,
question, Tim.
well, let me follow real quick, Mark, in the context of this comment. The on the 15, are you working with the assumptions of what is planned or immediately released in the Apple Intelligence? And so I'm wondering, will that satisficing persist a year from now with the new Apple Intelligence?
It will, but let's be clear that Apple's going to add much more functionality to Apple Intelligence over the next years. So you have to be a little bit cautious in that sense. Now, I asked Apple that exact question, and they said that the 16 Pro is optimized to handle Apple Intelligence for at least the first 2 years. So
I see.
they already are foreseeing that 3 years out that may not be the case, but in the end, it's because Apple always is, making things faster, better, etc.
Yeah. Mark,
I'm sorry.
That was my question exactly. Thank you, Ben.
okay. So we thank you for bringing that up, Ben. Thanks for answering with such expertise, insight, Tim. We will keep our eyes, ears, and our opportunities to upgrade, on the horizon. Two more topics. One, I want to say a brief homage, cum farewell to Kmart. The last big Kmart store, is closing. And at the beginning of my career, I had an opportunity to work for Kmart Apparel Corporation in ocean analysis and economics, bringing stuff into those stores from Asia. It was kind of an interesting world, right, between living in New Canaan, Connecticut, which is kind of like, somewhere between the Stepford Wives and Mad Men, and going to North Bergen, New Jersey, right, near the docks, right, to bring this stuff in. However, it was a great experience. And, Kresge, the Five and Dime, that goes all the way back to the previous 2 centuries, was, quite a retailer in its day. But we say farewell, right? Because clearly Sam Walton won on, the big box, store, dimension for that of retailing. So
Hey, Kevin, I have my personal story with that.
yeah.
Is I was pretty young when Kmart, was the lead retailer. And my mother would drag me around the Kmart building looking for the blue light special.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I'll tell you that this is my story. The first time I went in where ocean analysis, the guys took me down to show me what was actually being imported, right? This is a summer job. And if they said, oh, well, this, that, and the other thing, and they said, it's mostly, these days, there's a lot of polyester, all right? There's a lot of stuff, the buttons are plastic. And in fact, those buttons today, a lot of them are sewn in with fishing line. Okay. That's a monofilament, kind of thing. And I went back upstairs and I asked a question. I had a hypothesis into the tariff books. I said, we're importing this stuff as clothing, what if we imported it as finished plastics? Okay. Because it's all, plastic now. Right. And there was a significant difference in rate tariff between clothing and finished plastics. And they went through that loophole for 18 months before it got closed. And I saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in shipping because I was able to, it just popped in my head. I said, could this be right? Right. So they were very happy with me. And that's why the next year they said, please come back and we would like you to work in the economics department. All right. And so I was parking money all over the world to, to get a good rate between Friday afternoon and when they reopened on Monday, take that money would take a couple of trips around the world and we'd make some money on the money. Anyway, it was a great experience, and I'm
Should kiss your
grateful to them.
brain for
No,
thinking.
I'm just grateful that I had the opportunity to do it. Second topic, Kyle Shannon and I have a book coming out. Kyle, look at that. All right. Collective Intelligence in the Age of AI should be released to Amazon next week for the formatting and everything else. It's on-demand publishing, so no inventory. But it's been fun working on it with you, buddy.
Likewise. No, I'm excited about it. I'll drop our little podcast. I did a podcast of our book from the Notebook LM thing. If you haven't played with that, by the way, you need to. It's quite remarkable. So yeah. No, I'm really excited about it. And it's one of those things that one of the big insights for me about one of the surprises of AI for me is that when you understand how it works, it's a simple probability engine, and it doesn't make sense that it should feel as human as it does, and yet it does. And one of my big insights is it's not the mechanism that makes it feel human, it's the data it's been trained on. And the data that AI has been trained on is the collective intelligence of everyone that's come before us. So in a very real sense, we're tapping into, the collective intelligence of humanity. And so for me, that was the breakthrough I had about why AI feels so human, that Kevin and I were kicking around. And he said, well, there's a bigger collective intelligence idea here that what you're talking about is a part of. And so that's what we explore in the book. I'm really excited about it.
One observation I'd make about Kyle's use of Notebook LLM is that when he fed in the manuscript and I was listening to it, and I said, we didn't write that, okay? But it was actually quite good, all right? Because what it took the idea that we laid out, I think very well, that there's only a small percentage of human knowledge that's available for the scraping and, current training data, and that a lot of the rest of it's locked up. It's behind a firewall or a paywall or in a governmental SCIF or someplace else that's inaccessible. So we know a lot of stuff as humans, but we don't necessarily share it widely. The Notebook LLM took that and said, oh, this is like the training data has only been, you've only been given access to the children's library, right? At the local. And I said, yes, that's it. That's actually that's a good sound bite. Okay, is that we have yet to give it the ability to read the adult section of the library. So we'll see.
Yeah, it definitely.
I would offer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Because I'm in this process of launching a new book on Amazon. I have learned a lot of things that I would like to share with both of you about how to get the book into the world, and I'm happy to share that information.
Great.
Well, we're glad to receive it, and this is the first title that will be coming out under the Content Evolution Media imprint. So there are other books in the pipeline. So we're looking forward to sharing those when they're ready. And Cindy Kuhn is the Chief Media Officer of Content Evolution, just like Kyle is the Chief Generative Officer. So we're grateful for everything that they do. And I'm glad that you were able to join us for this episode. So any closing thoughts or comments before we end this episode? And I go back to celebrating my wedding anniversary.
Oh, nice.
Happy anniversary.
Congratulations.
This is the only thing on my calendar was doing this with all of you. So.
Oh, that's great.
What number, Kevin?
No, I'm not going to disclose that because that's a privacy issue, but I'm glad to tell you offline. I'm not going to
can't be anonymized.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's
I
in
have
public records.
If we have time, I've got access to ChatGPT's advanced voice. If people haven't played with it, I'm happy to demo it if we've got time.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to do it. Have a demo with you.
But I'll wait for others to comment on the conversation.
Yeah. Do you want to do a preview for 5 minutes before we close?
Yeah,
Tom?
sure.
Go for it.
Great.
Okay, so by the way, so if you're a ChatGPT Plus member, it should be available to you. It's in the mobile app only so far as I can tell. But it should be
Yeah.
coming to the Mac app and the Windows app. I had to delete and reinstall my app to get it to kick, but it looks like it's been rolled out to everyone. There's 9 voices that you can choose from. Let me start a new chat here. Hey, Quinn, how's it going?
Hey, Kyle. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing good. I'm sitting here talking to a bunch of people that want to see how you work. So what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Quinn, your resident AI extraordinaire. I'm here to chat, brainstorm, and provide a little AI magic. Whether it's inventing the next big thing or just having a laugh, I'm ready to dive in.
Why don't
What's on
you
your mind?
why don't you whisper like you're telling us a secret?
Leaning in closer. So here's the scoop. I can take any idea you have and turn it into something spectacular.
Oh, that's
Just
great. Hey, Quinn, you know what I'd like you to actually do? I'd like you to share a really long tongue twister where all of the words begin with the letter P, and I want you to do it in an Irish accent, and I want you to say it as fast as you possibly can.
All right, here we go. Patty's piglet Pete pranced proudly, plucking
Quinn, you got to say much faster. You got to say it much faster.
Got it. Patty's piglet Pete pranced proudly, plucking plump purple plums from the perky prickly plant, piling them precariously in a peck basket perched carelessly on a post.
Great. So, can you tell me a story, a bedtime story in a Louisiana Creole accent using slang and terms as if you were from there?
All right, Cher, let me tell you about the bayou. Once upon a time, down in the heart of the swamp, there was a little gator named Gaston. Now, Gaston,
So,
he loved...
anyway, there you go. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. I want
And
to
it's
add
and it's a
that
shame that this has to get into kindergartens and elementary schools as
Why?
soon as possible at a time when we're banning phones. It's unbelievable.
So one
Yeah,
other
yeah.
thing that I'll just say, Kyle took some recordings that I had from my family. And I recorded my dad and his sister before they passed away, and they actually grew up as the son and daughter of a track foreman for the Santa Fe Railroad. So I recorded Sybil telling me about growing up on a train, right? And what that meant, that there was, that you'd only, be in a school for, 2 or 3, 4 days before you had to change schools again, right? Because the track would move forward and you would go from one room schoolhouse between, Oklahoma and Kansas, right, at the time, to build a second line, right, between Dallas and Chicago. And Kyle took that, did this he did a different kind of treatment, but it was, pretty interesting. It was compelling. And that sparked me to write a children's book about Sybil's Big Adventure. And I did some, image generation based on the era, and Jim Kwolek, the design director for Content Evolution, is formatting this thing.
That's
And we're actually creating a kid's book about building this track, right, with Sybil as the protagonist and her little brother Harley, which is my dad, right? So we're working on it. It's kind of cool. And I always wanted to write about this, but it didn't occur to me for it to be a children's book, but it actually is working out very nicely as a children's book. So it's expanded my imagination in a very interesting way. So thank you for that, Kyle.
Yeah, of
And
course.
talk to me, Kevin, about publishing that, because again, I have some thoughts on that and some resources to provide.
All right, very good. So we are at the top of the hour. Thank you for joining. Great conversation today. And in everything you do, be intentional. We'll talk next week. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Kyle, for the demo.